that's super interesting to us, just to see where folks are calling in from, what nations they're affiliated with, or yeah, who you are and where you're from is always welcome. Edmonton, Altan, welcome. I've already been on a few calls today, so I'm gonna have a cup of tea while we're chatting. Grand Prairie, nice. I have a sort of relation there. Regina, Thunder Bay, Moose Factory, Thunder Bay via Moose Factory. Some people from Toronto, the PA. I knew some midwives that worked in the PA. From Halifax, Saskatoon. This is great. Victoria. I don't want to butcher the Wunjin. I'm sorry, I'm really not going to be able to say that well. I apologize. All right. So what we've been doing for these sessions is we have some questions that came in through the Survey Monkey. That's, if you're looking to submit any anonymous questions, then that's the easiest way to do it, is to go to the Survey Monkey link, and Layla will put the link in again into the chat at some point, and you can do that, or you can direct message us in the chat, and we're happy for you to direct message everyone, but also if you want to just keep it a somewhat more private, you can message it to the Indigenous Innovation Initiative, that's Layla, and she'll help to reframe it so that the question comes out to everyone. A couple people from Regina, that's great. So I want to start the morning. It's 5 after, morning for some of you, and maybe afternoon for the Halifax folks. And it's, you know, noon here in Toronto, but I just wanted to start. You know, I like to try to, you know, do the land acknowledgement and acknowledge that we're on Toronto, but also acknowledge that each and every person here is from different parts of Turtle Island. And I just want to honor the ancestors past and present that are connected to your territories, and the teachings and the people that are connected to your territories. In Toronto last night, we had some spring storms, and there was a big storm system that moved through with lots of rain, and the thunder beings were quite loud, kind of going through, and it made me grateful that I got my garden in this last weekend, because I know that those thunder beings are to awaken the seeds that we planted, and to make sure that we've provided the nourishment, that water for those plants that will produce the foods that will, some of them will produce the foods that will nourish us, and the medicines that will heal us, and the flowers and the other things that, you know, will feed the animals, and like the birds and the insects, and keep those pollinations going so that we have these things for generations to come. And so acknowledge the thunder beings. My great grandfather's name was Nimki, which is in Anishinaabe, it means thunder. And so when I hear those thunder beings calling, I think of my great grandfather looking out over me and my family. I want to also, you know, acknowledge, you know, we have some pretty extraordinary times right now. And, you know, as if COVID and the isolation and the lockdowns were not enough for so many of us, and the, you know, all of the different impacts, whether it's on our health or our finances, our communities, on our, you know, our psyches, were a lot. the things that have been happening down in the United States, as well as in Canada here, and the pieces that they're speaking to around equity and justice for Black people, for people of color, is something that really resonates. And I just want to put out there that my heart is there, and it's really heartbreaking to watch so many of it, but it's also, for me, it's been very inspiring to see the rise of those voices, and how my work is to continue to support our communities, because so much of what we're seeing down there, we have those deep connections to an understanding of what those injustices are and have been. And then I see my job as to make sure that we're continuously learning and working to counter those pieces. And so I just want to acknowledge each and every one of you and your communities, and to acknowledge the people who are, so heavily influenced, or not influenced, so heavily impacted by what is happening down in the United States, and the unrest that is happening at a personal level, at a community level, and at a national level. So just wanted to put that out there. We have a few questions that came in advance. So I'm going to start with those. You can come and go if your question has been answered. Don't feel like you have to stay on the call. This call is being recorded and it'll be posted. So if you want to come back to visit it, or if you have somebody who wanted to be here but couldn't be, you'll be sent the link and you can share the link with them. It'll be on an open YouTube channel that anyone can access, as long as they have Wi-Fi. And we'll go and start from there. Layla helps moderate me. So Layla, if you can start me off with the questions.
Absolutely. Since it seems like we were both signed in as Indigenous Innovation Initiative, I just wanted to quickly introduce ourselves. So you've been hearing from Sarah, the director of the Indigenous Innovation Initiative, and my name is Layla, and I'm the program officer working with Sarah. We have a team of 4, and I'm not going to put Pierce in the spot right now, but he's our program coordinator is here in the call as well, supporting. And the first comment in the group chat has the link for you to be able to post your questions anonymously, if that is what you prefer. If not, feel free to put them here in the chat box. But I do have a couple of questions that were submitted either through SurveyMonkey or on social media. And the first question is, can I apply to this program for an existing project, or does it have to be a new idea?
Yeah, so we've had a few versions of this question, and I think that the easiest way to respond to it is that this pot of funds, this call for funding is specifically to fund innovation, development, and testing. So Indigenous innovation, it's the development and testing of that innovation. And if you have a pre-existing program or service or product that you need ongoing operational money for, even if that product is very innovative, we can't fund ongoing operations. That is not what this funding is for. It's to develop and test new ideas. And innovation, Indigenous innovation, doesn't have to be just something new. It can be our old ways, traditional knowledge, traditional teachings, traditional practices or products that are applied to a new context. We would consider that innovation. But just to keep something that's already going to have additional funding is not what we can fund. Another example, though, would be if you have an innovative product that has that you've been selling, or that you've been distributing, or that you've been providing as a service that that has been successful and you've had some uptake, but you don't have a proof of concept, or you don't have the evidence to show that it is something that people want or that it works, then this funding could help to support the testing part, right? So you might have an innovative product and you want to get the testing, to get that proof of concept so that you can scale it. So for example, you might have a really great program that you want to, you might have a really great program. It's a social innovation program that you want to, that you've been running at a small scale in your community, and you want to show that it actually works, but you haven't, you haven't got any research money to do that. Then you could apply to test that innovation. On the other hand, you might have a really great innovative program that has worked in a non-Indigenous context, maybe in a global context, maybe in a non-Indigenous Canadian context, and you want to adapt it using Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing and doing, and integrated with community, then that could be the innovation development. And then you could further test it as well. But the idea is that this is for innovation funding, not for operation funding. Do you think that that answers the question?
I think so, but you guys can let us know in the chat if that answers your question. And a quick follow-up to that question is someone that's working with Indigenous adaptations of existing training and empowerment methods, if that in general terms sounds like that would be considered innovation.
Sorry, would you repeat that for me, please?
Yes, absolutely. Work that is work in adapting existing training and empowerment methods to the Indigenous context.
Yeah. So again, that's the example I just gave. If you have an existing program and you're adapting it to the Indigenous context, so if it's an innovative program being adapted to an Indigenous context, then that would be considered innovation.
Thank you. The next question we have is around more clarification around the concept of community, a connection with community. And there was specifically a person that was speaking about Indigenous homelessness and lack of people that have not had that opportunity to have a connection with their community, and how are we addressing that? So what do we mean by connection with community?
Yeah, so what we have done is we've tried to take as inclusive an approach as possible to Indigenous, what is an Indigenous community. And so our program is to support people across urban, rural, remote, and northern communities for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, but also using the principles of self-identification, self-determination, and inclusiveness. And so an Indigenous community does not have to mean a First Nation community or an Inuit settlement or a Métis settlement. It doesn't have to mean an Indigenous identified organization. It can mean lots of different things. And we know that our communities have been very impacted by lots of different things. And so we've tried to be as inclusive as possible by saying, you tell us what the community is. You tell us who that community is. It could be an urban two-spirit community. It might be a rural gardening community of Indigenous peoples. It could be a community of people who are trying to reclaim identity. It could be a community of homeless Indigenous people who you want to provide funding for. Those communities would all be recognized. For us, we're most, one of the more important pieces that we're looking for is how are they in a meaningful relationship with the Indigenous community if the lead is not Indigenous. Because we recognize that non-Indigenous organizations may have really great programs or services or products that would be incredibly valuable to our Indigenous communities. But those things should not be imposed on our communities. We really want there to be meaningful partnerships and wherever possible, Indigenous leadership. And of course, ultimately, this program is to advance Indigenous gender equality. And so how is it supporting the advancement of the gender equality using that gender lens across all of the different ways that gender can be influence, right? So who is the lead? Who are the key decision makers, right? Like think about your board or your senior executives or your executive director or other decision makers. Who is hiring or who is the program intending to hire? or who are the end beneficiaries for the innovation. And so those are a lot of different ways. And you may not have it perfectly sound right now. It might be, this is how we're going to advance equality from a gender lens in our organization. And including gender equality, not just for Indigenous women, but across the gender spectrum as well.
Thank you. The next question is, someone just wanted more clarification regarding one of the application questions. The question is, what is the application question, sorry, is what is the problem addressed by your innovation? Provide details on the specific context you're proposing to work on. And they wanted clarification on the statement, provide details on the specific contexts you're proposing to work on. What does that mean?
Well, you get to define what that means. That we're not looking for anything specific in how you give us details. But we know that there are a number of challenges in our communities. The Indigenous Innovation Initiative is looking to have an impact in our communities, a positive impact in our communities. And so if there are no problems that we're trying to solve, then we don't need to be here. So what is the problem that you're trying to solve with your innovation? I have to admit, I'm an Apple person, so I have my iPhone. Apple said the problem is people need to be able to have more connectivity, right? And so they innovated the phone to be more mobile and have a multitude of things on them. So the problem needs to be defined, obviously more, more complex than, or more in more detail than that. It could be research evidence that already exists. It could be a focus group that you talk about what the challenge is and give the details of it. We have a mental health program, an innovative mental health program. So in our community, mental health is a serious challenge. We've had this many number of suicides, this number of people with substance use. You provide all of the stats and the research. This is our innovation to develop it. You might have a different product. I think about, just because it's sitting in front of me, my Cheekbone Beauty lipstick. Lipstick isn't an innovation, but the beauty and fashion industry and the identity of Indigenous women is the problem. That, what is Indigenous women's kind of identity and our kind of overall stereotypes of Indigenous beauty, whether they're whatever. That's the challenge that is trying to be solved by creating an Indigenous owned beauty company. And so it's providing those details. It could be the video testimonials could have an embedded in that. You could have the other kind of evidence, like from photos, or just a write-up of what you see around you. So keep in mind, we're not looking for how likely it is we think your team is to be successful in this. We're not evaluating those aspects at this point. We will at some point want to make sure that you have the ability and the capacity and the supports to actually do the project you're proposing. But right now we're looking for what are those really bold ideas that are going to solve the most, these complex challenges in our community. And then how are those innovations, how are those ideas going to advance gender equality as well?
We got two questions that are pretty much the same question as a follow-up to that. And they're asking, there's limited space in the expression of interest, and should they be mentioning that the project is led by Indigenous women, or that they have Indigenous people in the board, or how do they relate to both Indigenous people and also gender equality in their expression of interest?
Yes. So yes, if you so keep in mind that this phase, you've seen in the RFP that what it's being evaluated on is it innovative and is it relevant? And it has to be relevant to the gender equality piece. And so you'll have to speak to that somewhere within it. And yes, we have a limited number of characters that you're allowed to submit. So you will have to, if you have a lot to say, you will have to use your words carefully, but keep in mind, we're looking for, is it innovative and is it relevant? And more or less, those are going to be weighted equally. And this evaluation, phase on this, the innovation and relevance evaluation phase is being done by community reviewers. So I don't have a say. So I've been asked by some people is, what are the chances that my project will get moved on to the second stage or get funded? I don't know the answer to that because we've worked really hard to remove us from the evaluation processes so that we can support answering questions like these. I don't want to be biased by the people who have asked me the most questions and in my reviews. And so we have the community that are looking at these responses. And so what do you think the community is going to be looking for? Might want to be in it, but look at those, they're going to be reviewing against those exact questions that are in the RFP.
Thank you, Sarah. We got a question submitted anonymously by someone that is in the call but wishes to remain anonymous, and it's a specific question about their project. Their idea is an innovative supply chain that would bring a growth in economy to Indigenous people. Within this supply chain, there are further innovative components within it. And they are concerned that perhaps the project might be viewed as too large to stretch the seed funding that they may receive. What are your thoughts on this?
So if your project is too large for the pot of seed funding, you may be well inclined, especially if you get through to the application phase, but even at this phase, is to what aspect of that process do you want to fund? If you can discern what aspect you specifically want to fund of that, then you may find it is easier to get funding from other sources. I can't answer you exactly which part you should apply to for your innovation. If you have other funds, you can certainly kind of speak to those other partners or other funders that you have for this process. I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but yes, you have to be able to work within the scope of the budget and the resources that we have available.
They messaged privately and they said, okay, thank you. So I believe that answered your question. If not, they said this is helpful and let me know if you have any follow-ups. The next question was submitted anonymously through our Survey Monkey link. Can a portion of the grant could be used for production of a for-profit product with a portion of sales supporting a charitable organization? And they're wondering if we have examples of businesses that have been supported this way.
Yeah. So this is a first ever launch of this initiative, and we're still learning as well from all of these different processes and the languages that we've been using. But in the agreement that we have right now with the pot of funds that we have available, this pot of funds is exclusively funded by WAGE, which is the Department of Women and Gender Equality. And so they have specific terms and conditions that apply to the funds that we have to use through that pot of funds. Eventually, we hope to fundraise for additional pots of funds, which may have different terms and conditions and hopefully more flexible ones. But as it stands right now, these are the terms and conditions that we have from the federal government, which is that they can't fund the operations of things that are of for-profit businesses. So if you are generating profit, then we can't fund those activities that generate profit during the project phase. So it doesn't mean that your innovation can't ever be profitable for you, but there has to be a commitment to, if there is profit generated, that it needs to either be reinvested entirely into the project or entirely divested into a social cause as a social entrepreneurship model for this particular aspect of the project. Now, it doesn't mean the entire rest of your business, if this is just a division or a line that you have, that the rest of the business is subject to the same rules. you would have to be able to kind of isolate this particular component. It doesn't mean, what was I going to say? I've lost my train of thought. It doesn't mean that you can't be generating revenue. You can certainly be generating revenue from it to cover your expenses in this development and testing phase. But we kind of also just want to speak to, this is the development and testing of an innovation. And very often in startups, or when you're starting up developing and testing a new product line, there really isn't meant to be profit generated from it at this development and testing phase. That's not the intent of it. Ultimately, we want to get that proof of concept, and then you can work to develop the pricing strategies that will allow it to be profitable. But for this pot of funding, it cannot generate any profit.
And I just wanted to let you know that the last
So can I just also say,
sorry,
though, that that doesn't mean that your salary, for example, wouldn't be, you couldn't be covered by this, right? So there are lots of expenses that go with it as well, that, you know, that may be, you know, covered by this pot of funds.
And I just wanted to quickly mention that during the office hours we did last week, Sarah went on detail, she went in a lot of detail regarding what's allowed and what's not allowed. So you might want to check that as well. The next question, there's two related questions. One of them is from Selena here in the call, and the other one was submitted anonymously. And they're both asking around how do they submit for more than one project? And Selena asks, what is the best way to submit more than one project? If it's better to do it under a different organization or just a different lead. And then we got an anonymous question that's asking if they could apply to fund a cohort of 3 new programs, or if they need to choose one program.
So you can apply for multiple, you can have, like, one organization can have multiple applications, but the leads need to be different. So you don't need to have a different organization for each project. And if you have one person who's using 3 organizations, like the second and third one would not be considered eligible. It would only be the first one that you submit. Does that make sense, Selena?
Let us know if, let's see.
Yeah, let us know. I think that
she said yes,
yeah,
thank you.
Yes. Okay. Now, in terms of the portfolio, what was the words that you used? There was
the second person is asking that if they could apply to fund a cohort of 3 new programs, that they can have one application for 3 new programs.
Yeah. So again, you would need 3 separate leads.
And then Angela's asking if you can repeat that. Angela, I'm not sure if you mean the whole answer or was it just the last thing she said? Let us know what you want her to repeat. And Selena is, oh, she said she wants you to repeat the prior to the last thing you said.
So if you have 3 separate initiatives that you want to apply for, you have 3 separate ideas, you can do that, but you have to have 3 separate people leading them. So one organization can apply for 3 projects. You would need a different lead for each project.
Mm-hmm. And they're asking if Flux allows for that and if they can use the same account.
Yes. Yes, you don't have to re-register if you've registered as an organization, and but like I said, they will ask the leads who the lead is.
Mm-hmm. There's a question, I'm not 100% from Alana here in the call. I'm not 100% sure I understand that, but maybe we need more clarification. Alana says, does the innovation have to be a service to Indigenous people and to Spirit LGBTQ, or can the first year be the work of planning said service? So I'm guessing the question is, do they need to execute, or can it be the planning? Can they do the planning the first year?
So this is the development and testing. So development could be the planning for, right? So the development and testing of the innovation. And it doesn't have to be an innovation. This Indigenous innovation doesn't have to be in service to Indigenous women and Two-Spirit folks. It could be led by an Indigenous woman or Two-Spirit or gender diverse person, if that makes sense.
Let us know if you guys have any follow-up questions. We're getting a lot of questions in the chat and a lot of them submitted privately, so I'm trying to record them all. The next question, someone wants an example relating to relevancy, and I also wanted to invite them to listen to the first question on gender equality, because that is, the relevancy will be related to that. But wondering if you can offer them an example, because they're working on their submission of expression and they're trying to figure out how to phrase their responses from relevancy.
I can hear my dog trying to get outside, so I'm going to do it after this question. In terms of an example around the relevancy, I would like just draw you to the RFP. There is examples of the different ways that it applies a gender lens. Right? So what is that challenge statement and how is it really responding to advancing gender equality? Like how is it advancing Indigenous equality using a gender lens? So, you know, again, who is in the major leadership decisions, right? So who's the lead, or, you know, what is the board that is and the key decision makers that are governing the project? You know, are they women? Are they gender diverse people? Is there equity across that board or those decision makers? And are you advancing it, right? So it's like, we recognize we don't have enough women on the board. We don't have anyone who's Two-Spirit on the board. And so we will work to, you know, to include that, or to bring someone on that can do that. Who's leading the project? Who are the senior executives, right? So sometimes we have larger organizations and we have senior leaders. Sometimes we have smaller organizations where there's just a sole proprietor. But so who's that lead? Who's that most senior person leading it? Who's it hiring? Is the intention to make sure that it's hiring like more women into construction projects or into STEM type projects? And then who's the end beneficiary? And it doesn't have to meet every single one of those, but those are ways that it could be relevant.
And we'll let you figure out the dog then, and then I'll ask you the next one. We're live, so you guys know we're live.
Yes, indeed. And probably my dog will lose her crap on another dog and you'll get to hear her loser.
Yeah, we'll get to hear that. A follow-up question on the relevancy. We have Nessa, I believe your name is pronounced Nessa, saying, oh, is it relevancy in the way, like, I'm an Indigenous woman with an innovation? Does that count?
Yes, Nessa, totally counts. Yes, you should mention it.
Great. She said, enthusiastic, yes, thank you. The person that has the 3 programs that's submitting the questions anonymously sent a follow-up. They said, okay, not to give too much specifics, but our focus is on improving measurement. So can we apply to improve a step in process applicable to all 3 projects?
Again, you have to propose something that's within the scope of the funding that's available. So if that's how you decide to frame it, then yes, you can apply in that way, if it's applicable across all 3 projects. You have to be able to implement it at some point. So if you don't get funding for the other projects, if you only get funded for one project, keep in mind, this is a limited pot of funds, and potentially all 3 would get funded because the community is the one that's doing the evaluation. But we have got a limited pot of funds. And so if the other projects are not funded, then how will you execute that innovation? So think about all of the different variables in that.
Thank you. Let us know if that answers your question, please. We have another question that was submitted anonymously and it's someone that's here in the call. The third question asks for current approaches and how my project will address it more effectively. I do not feel comfortable naming other projects and explain why my project would be better. That goes against my values of how we talk about each other. Will it still be valued if I only explain overall general approaches that are currently being used rather than detailed examples?
Yeah, we're not asking for gossip, for sure. We're not asking for gossip or for you to slander anyone or to, be, super critical of your community members, your family members, your friends, your colleagues, your peers. But that doesn't mean that you can't say what part of it is not working or why you think what you'll be doing is going to be an improvement over that. So that's, I hope, where we're trying to lean towards is that it's less gossip and more about what is the evidence, what are the facts in front of us. Also keep in mind that all of the reviewers, all of the community reviewers will be declaring conflicts of interest. So if someone knows you and is on our review team, they will be asked before they review your project to declare a conflict of interest. It's going to be pretty hard for some of our reviewers because they know a lot of people, especially when we get to the next phase. But we'll be working on making sure that there aren't conflict of interest. But then also every single reviewer is also signing confidentiality agreements.
Sounds good. And sometimes it's not necessarily what's better, it's just what's different. And it may be that it's not covering a specific need and yours is, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the other one's bad. Yeah.
Thank you.
They're asking about the evaluation criteria on the RFP. Are these the evaluation criteria for the expression of interest or the criteria for the full proposals?
Yes, so the RFP is a legal document. So we had to put all of the evaluation criteria and the entire process into that RFP. We had wanted to initially just put what this phase was going to have so that we wouldn't create confusion. So I apologize if it did create confusion. We tried to be as clear as possible that there's two sets of evaluation criteria. The first set is for this expression of interest phase. Is it innovative and is it relevant? And that's only what this application phase is going to be evaluated against. And so all of our community reviewers for the innovation screen will have clear instructions that they're evaluating it against innovation and relevance questions that are in there. If you are invited to submit a full application, there will be more questions for you to fill out and answer. And you would have another month or 4 weeks to fill out that full application. And that application, the questions for that application will be given or provided to the folks that are invited, and they will allow people to be able to answer against those evaluation criteria that are listed in the RFP. I think 4.5 if you're correct there. So just to rehash that, because I know I kind of jumped around a bit, the evaluation criteria in 4.5 that talk about the whole evaluation criteria and those 5 different metrics, that is for the full application. That's what we're going to be looking for in full applications. For this phase, we're looking to see, is it an innovative, is it a bold and innovative, Indigenous innovation idea? What is that idea? And then is it relevant to our challenge statement? Is it relevant to advancing Indigenous equality using a gender lens?
Thank you. We got a general statement on the SurveyMonkey more than a specific question. They say, I want to learn about the process. So I wanted to invite them to watch the webinar we had 2 weeks ago. And in that webinar, we went in detail through the steps of the process.
Yeah, we had the Flux person come on and speak to it. So it's probably a more thorough piece to watch. If there are specific questions that you didn't, because you did watch it and you still have that were unanswered, then we can try to answer those questions. The process is, yes, it's on YouTube.
Yes, Angela, it's on YouTube. And when I send everyone the replay, you'll get it. And then you can go check what other videos we have there.
Yeah. So our original webinar will have a slide deck and it'll have pictures of where to find things and kind of walk you through what that process is.
Oh, we have a really interesting question here. This one was submitted privately by someone that's here in the call. I was wondering, for my innovation, it is currently patent pending. Should I mention that the proposal cannot be made known to the public, as that will affect the patent approving process and could cause a denial of the patent? I do mention in the proposal that it's patent pending, but I do not say that the idea cannot be shared with the public. Should I mention that?
It's not our intent to share this with the public, at least not at this phase. And if you're invited to submit a full application, so we're not going to be telling people about like the innovations beforehand. If you can go put it in, if you haven't already closed your application, then adding it in could be helpful. If you're at your word limit, I'd be reassured that we're not going to be publicly promoting the different specific projects that applied to us. Of course, once we announce, then we will be in September. But of course, if you are one of the successful applicants, then we could work with you to work around those different specific intellectual property pieces.
They said, I don't think you are. I'm just a tiny bit paranoid, haha. Thank you for your question. And we don't have any.
Just to be clear, please do not submit intellectual property to us. Don't submit a copy of your IP application to us, because we're government funded, subject to disclosures. We don't expect to have any, but the government or anyone could request a privacy information kind of piece. So yes, please don't submit intellectual property, patents, those kinds of things to us. At least not at this phase, and typically we won't ask for those pieces.
Oh, don't
want to know about your idea.
Don't send me funny comments privately, because then I'm the only one that laughs. She said that she doesn't have enough characters to submit all of that. Okay, we did get another question I spoke to soon, and it's a question, anonymous question on SurveyMonkey, asking about the community that is reviewing and how are they chosen.
So we put out a call, an open call for an Indigenous Gender Equality Reference Group. And we've been actively working with that group, with some people who've kind of come and gone from that group, but we've been actively working with that reference group for the development of this launch since December, right? So our funding was announced in late October, third week of October. You can probably guess which day. Our funding was not announced, but it was like formally started on that day in the third week of October. And so in December, we launched that open call, and I think in November, actually, we launched the open call and we had a meeting in December. There's been about 20 or so active participants in that group. Some of them are potentially applying to the program. They are not going to be reviewers, but those who are not applying will be reviewers. And then we've been using other networks from that reference group to support getting the number of community reviewers that we need. We're looking for people who have an understanding of Indigenous contexts across Canada, and who understand the needs of Indigenous women entrepreneurs, of Indigenous entrepreneurs, and of innovation.
Thank you, and maybe we can mention a bit about the selection committee as well.
Yeah, so that's for the innovation screen phase. Each project will be reviewed by 3 screeners and the marks will be averaged. When we go through the full application phase, there'll be up to 40 applicants that are invited to fill in a full application. And then we have a separate review committee for the full applications, which we're calling our selection committee. And the selection committee is made up of our Indigenous Innovation Council members, as well as an additional 8 to 10 Indigenous and Indigenous industry experts. And so again, it's similar to like a community review, because our council is, you know, a volunteer board, so to speak. Our Innovation Council, Indigenous Innovation Council, is our volunteer council that supports the initiative as a whole, as well as these, you know, independent community reviewers who are going to be supporting the process. Their process will be similar in that each application will have 3 reviewers. Those scores will be amalgamated and averaged, but then there will be an opportunity for them to all meet together for a full day meeting, and there will be deliberations and an ability to rescore within a certain phase each of those applications. And then we will be putting them in a ranked order. And again, this is a competition, and so we will be funding until we run out of money.
Thank you. Peggy, who's here in the call, is asking, how much weight are you putting on attachments like video, photos, PowerPoint, or Word documents?
So attachments are to support the application being able to say whether it's innovative and relevant. And so it's a package. If you just submit the text, answers to the questions, then that's what will be evaluated. If you have very little text and just have the attachments, then that's what will be evaluated. But there's no weighting of, you know, 50, you know, 30% goes to this, 30% to this, and 20 to that. There's nothing like that. It's basically, is it innovative? Is it relevant? They're more or less equally weighted, and it's as a package being reviewed.
Thank you. And I'll double check, but I don't think we have any new questions at the moment.
Okay, I'm gonna let my dog in case any other questions come up.
Sounds good.
For folks who want to see my cute little pooch. This is Tula.
We did get 2 questions while you were up for like 5 seconds. And someone said, "Aw," so that's not a question. So we're getting the 3rd question from the person that has the 3 projects and wants to apply for the process improvement. So they have another follow-up anonymous question. They said, if the fund is 30,000 and we can apply for more than 1 project, if it has a different lead, does that mean that each one could request up to 30,000? So I think that what they're saying is, if they have 3 different applications for their 3 different projects, if they could apply for each one of them up to the 30,000.
So this is a pot of fund where you can apply for funding up to 250,000. Now, if you don't need 250,000, if you need 30,000, you can submit 3 projects for 30,000. And if those all get funded, then that means there's still lots of space for anyone else. You could even potentially, if they're all connected to each other, put them in as 1 project for 30,000 or 100,000. But if they're all connected, or you want to just have if your innovation is just to evaluate across all 3, but you don't have funding for operationalizing those other projects, then there will be an expectation that you need to be able to implement the project.
And also, I'm thinking that it would have to be 3 different innovations, right? Or like they have to figure that out first, because first they were mentioning that it could be a process of 1 step that affects all 3, right? So I guess they'll have to figure that out first. Is it 3 innovations or 1 project?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they said thank you. And Nessa is asking what will happen if we go over the character limit?
Thank you for acknowledging my puppy, but Nessa, it will stop allowing you to put more text in, kind of like Twitter does, right? Stops you at a certain character limit and you just can't submit it. I don't know the exact technical, whether it just won't submit it or it just stops putting it in. But there will be a firm limit for fairness.
Selena is asking if they should mention their capacity to implement in the expression of interest. For example, follow-up partners willing to participate if the testing phase is successful.
Follow-up partners. So again, Selena, the capacity to implement, you can touch on it, but that will be evaluated in the full application phase. This is evaluating, this happened last time too, it's like, is it innovative? Is it relevant? And so really I would spend your energy focusing on that part for the expression of interest phase. Is we're looking to see what kind of innovation is out there that can advance Indigenous gender equality or advance Indigenous equality using a gender lens. Not how effective you are at implementing at this point. Whether you have the capacity to implement will be evaluated at a later stage. There's another question. So you can speak to partner support. And I think I have another question in my stream that also is asking about partners and partnerships and whether they can submit linked applications. So they will be evaluated on their individual merits. If you have partners and you want to identify or mention them, you can put that into the application wherever it becomes relevant. We are not evaluating against the strength of your partnerships. You will be evaluated at a later stage on your connection to the Indigenous community, but this is around, is it an Indigenous innovation? Is it relevant? And so so they will be evaluated independently because they're getting randomly sent out to the reviewers. And so if you have 3 separate reviewers reviewing the 2 applications, the linked applications, they're not going to know about the other ones necessarily. And they're not going to be evaluated as a joint thing. They have to be able to stand on individual merit.
And Selena writes a follow-up question. I thought that partner support might help to demonstrate the relevance.
Yes, in the application phase, then that may be very, very relevant. Is the strategic partnership part of the innovation or part of how it's going to address the challenge in the community? Would be what you could address. But I think that the putting a strategic partnership, I'm trying to see the original question. Having willing partners, like certainly you can address it, but that's not what we're being evaluated against in this phase.
I think that the first question was regarding mentioning the capacity to implement, and then the follow-up question is mentioning partners if their partnership addresses the relevance for gender equality. That's what I'm understanding.
Yeah, so so then speak to how it's advancing the equality piece through that partnership.
Thank you, Selena. And we have another question. Selena says, thank you. Will submission of additional attachments with the expression of interest be measured or counted within the evaluation?
Yes. So it's the entire package that's being evaluated. So each reviewer will be asked to read the response to the questions and any attachments, and then to determine if it's innovative or relevant. And so it will be reviewed as a whole package. We are not like, it's, the additional attachments don't necessarily mean that the project is going to be more likely to be funded or that it's and additional points, or that it's deflecting from what's written in. It's the whole package. If you think that the additional attachments, whether they're short video clips or a PowerPoint deck, maybe you have a great pitch deck already that you want to submit, you know, within our limits. We can't ask the reviewers to review more than that, because can you imagine if we had half of the reviews submit hour-long documentaries to attach to their program? It would just be too long for them to actually review it. And I think actually that a lot of what you're trying to tell us would be lost. So we'll only watch, you know, within those limits, or look at those slide decks within those limits. I think, what's the third thing? Any photos or there's additional materials?
Photos, videos, Word document, and PowerPoint, I believe.
Yeah. And so we'll review those within the context of the whole submission. Some people might not have a lot to write down to say, and they want to just express themselves through a deck or a video. It will be reviewed in the context of whatever is submitted as a whole.
We'll do one last check. We have 2 more minutes till 1, and I'll do one last check on SurveyMonkey. We have no more questions here in the chat.
Thank you guys for these questions. These were all really great. I know some parts I sounded a bit like a broken record, but I really do encourage you to focus on the innovation and relevance piece, because that's what's being evaluated right now. We're going to want to hear everything about what your idea is. We know that we're going to be inundated with way more great ideas than we have funding for. Keep in mind, this is round 1. This is a 6-year initiative. We're going to launch another round, hopefully by the end of 2020. So kind of November, December time, we're going to launch round 2, and we're going to have a few more rounds even after that. If you feel like there's a need for more questions, then Layla's going to send out the links to everyone. You can say if we need another one of these sessions. Since I was so packed in this time frame, I'm suspecting that maybe there may be still some outstanding questions, because we're still getting some new ones. So if we get enough requests, we'll be able to maybe do one more of these Q&A sessions next week before the applications are due on Tuesday. But yes, thank you all for the questions. Please share this with your networks. We're also looking to potentially build some kind of a program that's going to help support the innovation development, getting you. So for those projects that don't get funded, we're looking to how we can support our community members to build out their ideas, articulate their ideas in different ways that might resonate more. And again, we've never done this. This has not been done in the Indigenous context with GCC or with the Indigenous Innovation Initiative, GCC being Grand Challenges Canada. And so we're in a learning process as well. And we'll be adapting to meet the needs of what the community tells us. So keep these questions coming. Know that there's another round. We're going to keep working with you to get more Indigenous innovation into our ecosystem, so we can improve people's lives with these awesome Indigenous innovation ideas.
Thank you. And there's a quick, thank you, Piers. Someone asked for a link of the YouTube video of the Flux, and he put it in the chat. And I also wanted to let you know these are publicly available. So when you receive the replay, or you look for Indigenous Innovation Initiative on YouTube, you'll find all our videos.
Yeah. And the Grand Challenges Canada website, I think, also has links to Flux support. You can email the Flux support line if you have specific problems or challenges with it. And there's also a written up instructions in the appendix of the RFP. But if you are having specific problems with Flux, once you've kind of gone in and tried, then message us and we'll support you with that. All right, Chimigwech, everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful evening, a wonderful day. And I look forward to seeing these submissions. I know there's going to be so many great ideas out there, and keep them coming, because I'm going to start using the themes from this to really kind of do more fundraising, because we've been overwhelmed by how many people are interested in this and some of the ideas that we've heard so far. So we're going to keep working to get more resources and funds to support this initiative, because we think it's going to be awesome, and we think you are all awesome as well.
Thank you everyone for joining, for submitting so many great questions and being so positive and encouraging. And thank you to our team, peers, for supporting behind the scenes. And thank you, Sarah, for all your answers.
Bye everyone, coast to coast, make wedge.